To all of you who join us here, welcome to the Blue Sky Vid-Cast, where the magic and history of Disneyland meet your imagination. The Disneyland Railroad is one of the most exhilarating and satisfying attractions in the park. To some, it is a stylish means of conveyance, but to so many, it is the destination. Join us as we take a grand circle tour of Disneyland, allowing glimpses into the magic of each land. We will take a close look at the history of the engines, the line, and the different train stations that are deeply intertwined with the stories and lives of Walt Disney and his Imagineers. Hello everyone, I'm Don Moore and your host for the Blue Sky Vidcast. Welcome back, you're right where you belong. Please be sure to click on that thumbs up if you like the video and subscribe to the Blue Sky Vidcast channel so you don't miss a single episode. In the early 1900s, trains weren't just a means of transportation, they were a lifeline and critical to the development of the United States. Walt Disney's father Elias, along with his uncle Mike, worked on the railroad. This instigated Walt's fascination with railroading. One of Walt's earliest jobs was as a news butcher for a few months in 1916, selling magazines and snacks on the Missouri Pacific, Kansas City Southern, and the Missouri-Kansas-Texas railroads. About this experience, Walt said, "My railroad career was brief, exciting, and unprofitable." Little did he know that a number of his later successes would involve railroading in both his personal and professional lives. When the animation studio began to become successful, Walt was able to reconnect with his boyhood love of trains. Indeed, so did several of his brilliant Imagineers. In many ways, a model steam engine represents what makes Imagineering special. It requires precise technical knowledge of engines and metal fabrication combined with designing beautiful aesthetics and environments to create a fascinating guest rider experience. Walt was able to rekindle his love for trains through his friendships at the Walt Disney Company. Imagineers and Disney legends Walt Kimball, Ollie Johnston, and Walt Disney had a special bond. Each were lifelong fans of trains and each created some of the first and best backyard railroads in the country. But it started with Ward Kimball, who was a Disney animator and one of Walt Disney's 9 old men. Among his many achievements was the creation of Jiminy Cricket. Ward started with a boxcar to house his miniature train collection, ended up purchasing a real steam engine, and with the help of many studio employees spent 3 years restoring the engine to working order and building a 500-foot-long main line in his backyard. It's a safe bet that Walt would not have built his own backyard railroad if not for attending a steam-up, or railroad party, at Ward Kimball's house in 1945. At the end of the party, Walt had the opportunity to drive Ward's engine, the Emma Nevada. It was the first time he had ridden in the cab of a train since his days working for the Missouri Pacific Railroad as a teenager. Trains continued to be a major presence in Walt's life. In July of 1948, Walt boarded a train to attend the Chicago Railroad Fair. In addition to being invited to participate in the Wheels a Rollin' pageant, where classic trains paraded by, Walt was deeply moved by the recreation of the funeral train for the president he most admired, Abraham Lincoln. Also, after visiting the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, on his way back to California, Walt was impressed and inspired by the attractions of this park, which included a 440 locomotive that pulled guests around the estate. I think this was the spark that reignited Walt's passion for model railroads. After this, he, with lots of skilled help from his engineers on his Imagineering team such as Bob Gurr and Roger Brogy, built his own backyard railroad that became the model for the Disneyland Railroad. The idea of a railroad circling the park was included in every early concept for Disneyland and was one of the first acquisitions for the park Walt sought to make. When the sale fell through on 2 scale model engines Walt had been trying to purchase, he challenged his own skilled employees and Imagineers to design and fabricate their own trains. They thought they could do it. All they needed to do was build a larger version of Walt's Lily Bell engine and decided upon the exact size and scale as the Emma Nevada from the Grizzly Flats Railroad. Although there are usually only 4 operating at any given time, Disneyland now has 5 narrow-gauge steam engines at the park. On opening day of Disneyland, July 17, 1955, two newly built steam engines were in operation. Engine number 1, C.K. Holliday, was named after Cyrus Kurtz Holliday, founder of the Atchison and Topeka Railroad, later the Santa Fe Railroad, established in 1859, although it was known around the studio as Retlaw 1. The locomotive was actually built by Wed Enterprises, now Walt Disney Imagineering, in Burbank, California, from a design inspired by Walt Disney's model train engine, the Lily Bell, the centerpiece of his backyard railroad, the Carrollwood Pacific. So an animation studio managed to prove themselves capable of manufacturing railroad engines. The miniature Lily Bell, named after Walt's wife Lillian, was built in 1949 by Walt Disney and the other train enthusiasts at the Walt Disney Studios. The caboose was entirely built by Walt Disney himself. The little train made its debut at the studio Christmas party that same year and was then installed and operated in Walt's own backyard. In 1958, the Disneyland Railroad expanded with its third and oldest steam engine, engine number 3, the Fred Gurley. Walt made the decision because the two locomotives could not keep up with crowd demand for the attraction. This engine was named after Fred G. Gurley, president of the Santa Fe Railway from 1944 to 1957. It is the oldest steam engine operating on the Disneyland Railroad. Built by Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, it was first put into service in August 1895 and began circling the happiest place on earth on March 28, 1958. Engine number 4, Ernest S. Marsh, was added the following year on July 25, 1959, and was named for Ernest S. Marsh, president of Santa Fe Railroad at the time. It was built in 1925 by Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the same company that built its fellow Disneyland Railroad engine, the Fred Gurley. Nearly 50 years passed before the fifth steam engine would join the Disneyland Railroad. Engine number 5, the Ward Kimball, is unique among its fellow steam engines as it was named not for an icon of the railroad, but for an icon of the Walt Disney Company. He was named a Disney legend in 1989. The Ward Kimball, originally built in 1902, was put into service on the Disneyland Railroad on June 25, 2005. After a stint at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. The Ward Kimball has a hidden Jiminy Cricket near the front of the engine you can see from the passenger cars if you look hard enough. The engines can be hooked up to any set of passenger cars. Disneyland usually has 2 trains running with forward-facing seats and 2 trains with side-facing cars. At any point, any engine could be pulling Lillian Disney's famous parlor car, also named the Lily Bell. Created as a VIP car for the train in 1974, the parlor car Lily Bell is the last remaining car in Disneyland from the original opening day trains. Lillian designed the interior of the car, which is absolutely beautiful. She used the same stylish and luxurious Victorian charm she used when designing the Disney Studios apartment above the fire station on Main Street, USA. For both, she chose her signature classic cranberry red colors. It wasn't too long ago that the Lily Bell was accessible to the public on every ride, but the popularity took a toll on the luxury car. In 2014, after an extended closure and refurbishment of the car, the access to the car became more limited. To ride the Lily Bell, there are still a few ways. If you want to ride for free, you need to be one of the first in line in the morning to get the opportunity. So trip the light fantastic moving up those stairs. You will need to be one of the first 14 to request a ride. So you have about a 14 and 50,000 shot on a busy day. With those kinds of odds, it may take a few tries. A more reliable way is to purchase a seat on the Grand Circle Tour. Disneyland now offers a train-themed tour in which a cast member joins you first on a guided walking tour, followed by a ride on the Lily Bell. Having the cast member there to point out the many interesting things about the train car is fantastic, and you get a hot drink and pastry on your ride. They even have tour-specific merchandise, including a really cool map of the Disneyland Railroad. If you really want to ride the Lily Bell at your leisure, you might also consider joining Club 33, as members get regular access to the train car. Well, come on folks, let's take a Grand Circle tour together, shall we? We start our journey at Main Street Station. This iconic building is the first structure you see when entering Disneyland USA. It looks great from every side and it is completely unpretentious and overwhelmingly charming. As you walk up the stairs, you get an amazing view of Town Square and Main Street beyond. Look out to the flagpole where Walt gave his dedication speech at the park opening with his touching words. To all who come to this happy place, welcome. Disneyland is your land. Each Christmas season on these stairs, a Disneyland choir and orchestra performs an intimate yet spectacular candlelight concert. As you reach the platform, waiting for the next train, you can also look across the tracks and see an old pump-style handcart built by the Kalamazoo Manufacturing Company, picked by Walt himself in 1958. The station here is one of 4 found in the park. However, only the depots at Main Street and New Orleans Square are designed as grand stations from America's past. Main Street Station is a fine example of Second Empire-style architecture popular in North America in the late 19th century. Like other buildings on Main Street, it utilizes forced perspective to make it seem larger than it is. The second story is a little shorter and the third even shorter, creating the illusion of height. The Main Street Station is framed with a centered sign which includes both the elevation of 138 feet above sea level and the population of Disneyland, which is updated periodically to reflect the number of guests who have visited the park since it opened in 1955. As you board your train and pull out from the station, you are riding the first attraction to become operable in Disneyland. The tracks follow the crest of a 12-foot berm that creates the perimeter of the park. It was designed to maintain sightlines and keep the Disney magic inside and the rest of the world outside. This first leg of the journey is perhaps the least exciting as you pass through some fine foliage near the Jungle Cruise, but little else on your way. I think it is fascinating to consider, as Disneyland has evolved over the years, even within Walt's lifetime, how the railroad has shaped the park attractions. The railroad has continually presented challenges for the Imagineers wanting to add new rides to the park. There simply is not enough room inside the berm to place and hide the show building for all the attractions and maintain a traffic flow. So almost every ride that has been added to the park since 1963 has had to consider how to incorporate the railroad into its show building, as well as travel guests beyond the railroad without their knowledge. If it was not for having to consider the railroad, we might not have the first half of Pirates of the Caribbean, as the caves and tunnels traveled the guests through the basement and out under the railroad into the main show building, which starts with Barbossa's pirate ship. Without the railroad, we might not have the stretching room. Can you imagine the Haunted Mansion without it? The stretching room was just a clever solution for traveling guests down and under the railroad again to the main show building. Or what about the immersive queue of Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye? This fantastically themed and lengthy queue truly sets the mood for the attraction, and it wouldn't be the same without it. Or how about how the train was considered in the designs of Splash Mountain and It's a Small World, and how much they added to the attractions? It has, in a roundabout way, benefited the design of many signature attractions by providing the right obstacle for the Imagineers to overcome. After leaving Main Street Station, the first stop on the Disneyland Railroad is New Orleans Square Frontierland Station. The station features a number of buildings, including a functional water tower and a loading platform. Across the tracks from the loading station is the original Frontierland depot that existed before New Orleans Square was built. You are breathing rarefied air if you ever get an opportunity to be inside this historical depot. The inspiration for the original Frontierland station was the wooden depot featured in the 1949 Disney live-action film So Dear to My Heart. Walt Disney initially wanted to reuse the actual set piece that had been built for the film, but when he learned that his friend and fellow animator Ward Kimball had already modified it into a fully functioning building for his personal Grizzly Flats Railroad, Walt asked his designers to build a new one just like it. As you wait for a train in the station, you will hear a telegraph clicking away at the depot across the tracks. This is actually Walt Disney's opening day dedication speech being sent in Morse code out on the wires. Here age lives fond memories of the past, and here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future. Disneyland is dedicated to the ideals, the dreams, and the hard facts that have created America, with the hope that it will be a source of joy and inspiration to all the world. As you now head out through Critter Country, rounding the rivers of America, be sure to enjoy the most pastoral and beautiful leg of your journey. Guests can take in the landscapes inspired by 4 of America's majestic rivers: the Mississippi, the Columbia, the Missouri, and the Rio Grande. Rio Grande. Rio Grande. Rio Grande. Rio Grande. It's the river. The trains travel across the rocks on a trestle that extends out over the water, passing waterfalls, wildlife, and some familiar sights of the Old West. If you keep an eye out, you may even be able to see some familiar logos from a ranch that once was located around these parts. The northern border of the park used to be completely straight, and the train passed just north of the Living Desert and the Storybook Land canal boats. It was much tighter than it is today, offering some fantastic views of Fantasyland and Tomorrowland. Toontown Station opened with the land in 1993, replacing a long-gone Fantasyland station that was in the park from 1956 to 1966. The Fantasyland station had a festive pitched roof and was themed as a medieval court like the rest of the land. The station sat pretty close to where It's a Small World is today. In 1966, when It's a Small World was built, the North Line got a bump as the berm and line were moved quite a bit north, and the straight line gave way to a curve. From 1966 to 1985, there was no North Border train station at Disneyland. In 1985, where the Fantasyland Theater sits, Disneyland built the Videopolis nightclub and opened the Videopolis train station in Fantasyland with its more modern sign and platform-style depot. The Toontown Depot was built on the same spot. If you've ever thought the Toontown train depot looked familiar, there's a reason. The station is a cartoon version inspired by the original Frontierland station. It has the same basic design with a similar roof style and a small fenced-in section for luggage and other freight. The luggage area is especially fun and colorful with humorous suitcases and crates, including one suitcase with a sock hanging out of the top and another with dog bones popping out the sides. As you head out from Toontown Station, you pass through the brilliant facade of It's a Small World, allowing you to look down onto the animal topiaries and wave at the guests entering the famous boat ride. The leg between Toontown and Tomorrowland does not offer the best views of the trip, but it is interesting, themed to the scientific, agricultural world of Tomorrowland. It's at this point on our journey that I always recall that the Disneyland Railroad was not the only train in the park. Tomorrowland had the Viewliner train of tomorrow. For 2 years, from 1957 to 1959, the fastest miniature train in the world operated alongside portions of the main railroad line. It was removed to make room for the 1959 Matterhorn, submarine voyage, and monorail expansion. However, interestingly enough, some of the old Viewliner rail line parts were used by Disney legend Ollie Johnston on his home railroad. Before returning to Main Street Station, the Disneyland Railroad makes one more stop in Tomorrowland to drop guests off in the future before heading back to the past. The station, not too much more than a covered platform, is essentially unchanged from when it was added to the line in 1958. This station is not my favorite to try and board the train on a busy day. The station is lovely, but most passengers choose to stay on the train here, and not many seats become available. Keep that in mind. As you leave Tomorrowland Station and head back on your journey to Main Street, you get a theatrical and historical treat, a trip through the Grand Canyon. As you pass through the 306-foot-long Grand Canyon diorama, be sure to keep an eye out for landscaping, ancient ruins, and various examples of indigenous wildlife. As the trains move past the Grand Canyon diorama, they make their way to yet another diorama, this one taking guests to what the Grand Canyon may have looked like millions of years before. The Primeval World diorama and the audio-animatronic dinosaurs were originally designed and built by Disney for the 1964-65 New York World's Fair and were added in 1966 to Disneyland to enhance the railroad experience. At the dedication ceremony, the train was blessed by Native American tribal leaders from the Southwest. The primeval world is a magical attraction, part museum and part exhilaration, and for many it is their earliest dino memory of the park. As you pull back into Main Street Station, completing the full Grand Circle tour, I hope you have a new appreciation for the history of this attraction, of the love, respect, knowledge, passion, and creative energy that went into making it, of the man that made it all happen, and how the railroad is the exposition for every adventure to be had at Disneyland. Thanks for joining me, Don Morin, and the Blue Sky Vid-Cast, where the magic and history of Disneyland meet your imagination. There is so much more in the coming weeks with Blue Sky Vid-Cast. Be sure to check out our past episodes. We would love if you enjoyed the shows, if you'd like and subscribe, and be sure to share it on social media with your friends and fellow Disney fans. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Be sure to grab all your belongings and enjoy the rest of your Disney day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.